What's happening, everybody? All right, so in this video we're going to be talking about the 5.7 liter Hemi modifications. What works? Well, the good thing is that the 5.7 takes to modifications better than the 6.4, which is obviously the first engine you're going to be comparing the 5.7 to. The goal for most guys is to try to be able to at least meet, get close to meeting, and maybe even in some cases exceeding the performance levels of the 6.4 liter, which is the 5.7's bigger brother. But the good thing, again, is that 5.7s take well to modifications because they are the corporate V8 for Dodge. You'll find that 5.7 in cars, trucks, heavy-duty trucks, everything. And as such, they're really not put together in terms of exhaust or catbacks or any other place for that matter for actual outright performance the way that a 6.4 liter is. You can do some things to really turn the tide there. So let's get started to talk about one of those things. First of all, we're going to build this thing from the tail forward. That's the best way to do it realistically because the first thing we're going to look at is the rear gear. I suggest going with a 3.7 gear for that car and a 3.92 for the trucks. The reality is that these cars and trucks, but let's kind of edge more towards the cars here, are heavy and they need as much help as they can get getting out of their own way. The 5.7 liter doesn't put out near as much torque as the 6.4, so in this case, the 3.7 gear is a perfect match for that 5.7. Consider that as one of your first modifications to the car. Not a power thing, but more as a putting torque to the ground thing. That's going to help you out quite a bit. By the way, some tuning may need to be incorporated in with that, mainly to get some driver command torque to wake up that thing as far as a throttle response issue goes. But the good thing is that you don't necessarily have to have a tune to make it work. It'll just optimize it all the way around. Next is going to be that catback. You're going to need to put some type of a performance catback on that vehicle. The stock catback on the cars is ridiculous. It's heavy. It's not really performance oriented. I would suggest going with something. It doesn't matter which brand you go with. Just go with something that's a bit more performance oriented. And that's going to do a couple of things. One, it'll free up a little bit of horsepower. And two, it'll be lighter in the process. Something that your vehicle desperately needs to do, which is lose weight. Next is going to be headers. In this case, I would suggest going with long tubes. The car is going to respond well to them, and the other thing is that you're spending the money anyway on this thing. Might as well throw some pretty decent parts at it while you're at it. I suggest going with a setup like Cook's because Cook's actually fit really well. I've run into issues with these Hemis with other manufacturers, and beating a set of headers into submission to fit isn't any fun. And of course, headers rubbing on things tends to really irritate knock sensors, so let's just go with that. Oh, that reminds me, I missed a spot. Run a decent grade of fuel in that car. These cars do ride the knock sensors like a rented mule. I've seen these things on tip and pull as much as 4 and 5 degrees of timing on the short-term knock retard that can be a bit mitigated by running a better grade of fuel. My suggestion is a minimum of 89. But obviously, if you're going to get a tune on this thing, you're going to want a 93 octane or at least a 91 octane tune for your vehicle. Just make sure you're going to somebody that speaks Mopar. The guy down the street that doesn't tune many Mopars can actually do you more harm than good. But getting back to it, we've talked about the gear, we've talked about the gasoline, we've talked about the catback, and we've talked about the headers. Those things alone are going to make quite the difference for you. But now we're going to get into, well, tuning is going to be a big deal. And in this case, I'm talking about the transmission. Yes, you're going to pick up power and you're going to have to tune the thing anyway if you go with headers. But the transmission is really where you're going to pick up the most drivability and you're going to feel the most with that transmission tune. Again, I cannot say this enough, and I cannot be any more adamant about making sure that you take your Mopar to somebody that speaks fluent Mopar to tune it. Next, we can talk about making more power. There's a couple of different ways you can go. You can either go forced induction or nitrous, but we're going to stick to forced induction at this point, or going with a camshaft. So let's talk about forced induction first. The good thing about forced induction is most guys are going to probably be going with a positive displacement supercharger, a lot like the Whipple or the E-Force from Edelbrock. Those are two very good, very tried and true setups. I have seen cars with that setup with full exhaust make on a Mustang dyno, say 435, 440 horsepower to the rear wheels. To put that into perspective, that's about 30 more horsepower than a very healthy stock 392. Plus, you get the added benefit of having more torque on the initial hit. So, another good place to go. Another cool thing about that is that by putting boost on a 5.7, you're really not taxing the powertrain too much. 5.7s do take very well to boost, and they're fairly durable with boost because of positioning of the ringland and potentially the ring gap being a little bit more friendly to higher cylinder pressures than the ones in the 392. However, they also don't run into the torque limitations of that HP70 transmission as quickly as 5.7s do once you start throwing boost at them. Which means that the car is going to be a lot of fun to drive without too many drawbacks, really. Now, if you're not planning on going boost and you want to go with a cam, keep the thing naturally aspirated, a couple of things you want to look at. First and foremost, get the intake manifold ported. This engine, as it is the corporate engine, there's not a whole lot of quality control that goes into inspecting the runners on those intake manifolds. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, when I port intake manifolds, the ones that are typically the worst are the 5.7s. So the runners will have a ton of casting flash in there potentially. Each one is going to be a little bit different. That's why there's a little bit of an inconsistency with power output between those engines. But I can tell you that if nothing else, you'll be blueprinting the intake manifold, basically just making that thing flow what the engineers would expect it to flow. The throttle body, don't worry about that so much. It's an 80 millimeter unit. It's the same setup that comes on the 392. You can go with a true ported throttle body from a company like Fastman. That would be about as much as I would suggest on one of those cars. The most that I suggest on the 6.4s as well, unless it's got some extensive porting, and then that's a whole different conversation. But let's stick to the 5.7. Stick to that intake protocol and you'll be in really good shape. But camshafts. So when I'm talking about camshafts, in this case, you got to be careful when it comes to camshafts in the 5.7. You don't want to kill torque too much. I would consider a camshaft, a torque converter, and a gear as one solid package altogether. So you can run a 370 gear without a cam or with a cam, it doesn't matter, but I would probably want to run a converter like the Circle D. I think Circle D makes a 3,400 RPM converter. They've actually got quite a few that work well with the 5.7s and that HP70. Based on whichever cam you go with, do your research. But a good generic overview cam is going to be somewhere around 216 odd degrees on the intake side, somewhere around 226, 228 on the exhaust. If it's a locked out cam, your intake center line is going to be somewhere around 108-ish degrees, and lobe separation angle somewhere around 114, 113. If that sounds familiar, it should, because that's kind of a garden variety hot rod cam, and that's one of the good things about the 5.7 is that it does respond very well to good old-fashioned hot rod tricks. And with a cam, as long as you have a very aggressive load profile, those types of specifications will work great. They'll pick up really good mid-range power, which is really what these things need to get moving. And they'll sound good in the process. Gets a little bit of theater going on with the car. But again, if you go with the cam, highly recommend going with the torque converter to, again, get that thing out of the hole, which is going to require another level of tuning as well to make sure all this stuff kind of gels together just fine. But again, mix that in with the gear and you're going to have a car that, or a truck for this matter, if you've got a truck, go with a 3.92 rear gear set, you'll be set. But that setup in a Challenger will actually do some pretty good work at hurting the feelings of a lot of 6'4" guys that it runs up against, especially on the street where it counts. And Even just doing a gear and exhaust mods in a tune will make the car a riot to drive on the street, which is really more to the point here with the 5.7. So without breaking the bank, you can put together a project that is a lot of fun, that you can enjoy the whole entire course of, and know that with each step that you take, you're putting the thing in a position where you're going to notice a difference. Whereas with a 392, you may not. And then again, you go boost with a 392, well, all bets are off at that point. So take that for what it's worth. But anyway, hope that helps you out as far as what works. Always, don't forget to go with a 180-degree thermostat, and have some fun with that thing, man. Get it out there. Try not to do anything stupid. And that's a wrap on this one. Y'all have a great one. Adios.